So I just want to welcome anybody viewing this, but specifically our two friends here, Aaron Dworkin and Franklin Sirmans, for joining us for this further edition of ArshtTalk, which you can find at Arsht at Home on our website. Today's discussion is going to cover a number of topical issues, but specifically, I'm so honored to have these two gentlemen spend some time with me. Aaron Dworkin, multimedia performance artist, author, social entrepreneur, artist, citizen, just an all-round entrepreneur who keeps reinventing himself, and very importantly, the founder of the Sphinx organization in Detroit, Michigan. And Franklin, of course, director of the Pérez Art Museum. Franklin is a curator, a writer, an editor, and a respected leader in the field here in Miami, and a well appreciated colleague and peer of us here at the Arsht and myself. Welcome both. Very, very good to have you with me. Just to make sure that you'll do a better job than I just did of introducing yourself, why don't you share a little bit about your job and your journey to this moment. Why don't we start with you, Aaron?
Sure. Well, and it's great to be able to be here. I kind of have a bit of a varied past, but my original training and development in the arts was on the violin. And then ultimately, when I was in college, started thinking about these issues of diversity and inclusion. And now that's well over 25 years ago, and from that came this idea for an organization that could really focus on those issues, and so that gave rise to the Sphinx organization, which I founded when I was still actually an undergraduate at the University of Michigan. And then from there, the organization was able to grow and try and address the issues in a number of ways. About 5 years ago, I stepped down from that role to accept the position as dean at the School of Music, Theater, and Dance at Michigan, and the opportunity to go back to my alma mater and hopefully make a difference was very important to me. And then I transitioned from there a couple of years ago just to faculty, and so now I'm on faculty teaching arts leadership and entrepreneurship. And one of the great things, I think, in terms of being a faculty member is that I feel like every faculty member is actually really an entrepreneur, both because you have the work that you're doing with your students, and you have that academic, freedom and ability to innovate and to think, how can you best prepare them? And certainly for me, in the role that I'm playing, preparing them for leadership and roles in the field of the arts. But then also through your professional activities, really be an entrepreneur. And in my case, also in this field of the arts, and that's manifested in different ways through, books, as you mentioned, film project that I'm currently working on, and of course the show Arts Engines.
Great to hear of all the things you're involved with, Aaron. Franklin, you are relatively new at the Pérez Art Museum. What's your journey to this moment?
Well, Johann, it's great to be here. It's great to be here with you both. I can't believe it, but I'm actually coming up on 5 years at the museum as of the fall. And of course, this year being one we could have never imagined. I grew up, I kind of grew up around the arts, I think, in some ways, went to openings, art openings at Studio Museum in Harlem very early on, grew up in New York City. And it was always there as something kind of in the subconscious, I guess. Didn't really, think of it as necessarily a career, but thought maybe I would gravitate towards writing in some fashion, and came to understand how much writing about artists was a form of curating, and eventually drifted into that space. I've now been here, as I mentioned, almost 5 years, and was in Houston for 4 years, and was in LA prior to coming to Miami for almost 6 years. So have bumped around a little bit, but I always felt like Miami was a particularly fascinating place to be and to work and to consider histories as they relate to culture. In fact, I did an exhibition in 2008 called Neo Hoodoo, Art for a Forgotten Faith, which was very much about art and spirituality in a broad sense, but more specifically in an American sense. And what does it mean when you have the potential synergy of a Western tradition in terms of religion that, of course, then here in the New World meets with the African. So that was kind of the foundation for this exhibition, and it brought me to this museum as a curator those many years ago before I ever imagined working here.
5 years, wow.
I can't believe it.
Somehow I thought it was less than that, but I guess time
Me
just
too.
goes by, right, Franklin? But it's good to hear of your background there. Thank you for sharing. I'm really looking forward to a discussion about the very troubled journey towards social justice that we are experiencing, not just in this country, but worldwide. But right now, I guess topic A is COVID. Everything is in the atmosphere and under the cloud of COVID. And I just can't go any further without asking you how you're doing, how this is impacting. I'm going to start with you, Franklin. How is this changing your life? How has this impacted your work? And you know, just briefly, what do you see looking forward?
Can you hear me okay? Yeah, sorry, I got a little bit of feedback there. Yeah, it has been a challenge to say the least. We're doing well. We're doing the best that we can, and I think that, you know, since we talk about COVID first, and I think we'll talk a little bit about social justice as well, is that you know, the pandemic, the initial pandemic of COVID has given us an opportunity to reconsider many of the ways in which we go about our business. And I don't mean just our business and culture, but the way that we live as people, as Americans, as human beings, how we treat each other. The deep and vast differences in between the way that we value human lives in this country, the vast inequity for those who have and those who have not, have been a striking part of the conversation since day one. We know that people of color, Black people, have been affected by COVID way, way, way more than those who are white. So we're already having this conversation, right? And we're all in culture, so we talk about these kind of things at a certain level all the time. COVID has really reinforced the importance of the conversations, I think, for all of us, and has given us an opportunity. We've now been granted a even more significant opportunity because of the light that has been focused upon the inequity of social justice in this country, the movement of Black Lives Matter. All of this is now putting us in a position where we can and hopefully will rise to the occasion to make consequential changes in this country. So I'm just, you know, on one hand, it's like when this happens and we talk about factual things like losing 20 to 30% of our budget in this year due to COVID, I'm looking for the many silver linings. And you know, I can point to certain ones, like we had our couple of big annual fundraisers right before this hit, okay? That allowed for us to be in a certain position to confront this problem. But really, in a broader sense, I do believe that the silver lining is that we have the opportunity to become better human beings.
I like hearing that, Franklin. I've always said never waste a good crisis, and I think this does give us an opportunity to really rethink and reimagine different ways ahead. Aaron, COVID, what does it feel like, and what has it done to you under this cloud of COVID?
Yeah, so it's interesting because there's a couple ways that I think about it. First, I'm appreciative. I'm appreciative that I haven't had to directly fight a health issue related to it, knocking on wood. And I'm appreciative because I'm still able to do my work. And so many people are either fighting it directly in terms of their health, or they're having to deal with an inability to be able to do their work. And so first, I'm appreciative. I am also optimistic as it relates to also kind of really what you were talking about, Franklin, that we would otherwise not necessarily be able to have this conversation. The way in which we communicate, I've had conversations, video, seeing people I otherwise probably would not have seen over the past 3 months, actually because of the fact that we've done that. I've had far more video conferences and where I see people that otherwise would have been by phone. Somehow now what we used to do by phone now is through video, like, well, we'll just Zoom and we can see each other. So interestingly, in certain ways, I've actually connected more with some people than I would have otherwise. And I'm optimistic about what those changes and opportunities will be, because we have taken what otherwise was incremental adoption of certain things, and it just happened right away. And of course, in higher education, where I am, where, a lot of universities struggled with how should we do remote teaching, how much, and certainly looking down on a fair amount of remote teaching. And now overnight, everyone, of course, went to remote teaching. So we have taken what otherwise might have taken 10 years to adopt and did it overnight. And a lot of that will just never go back. Boards that I'm on, say with our community foundations or things like that, that otherwise used to do a lot of things by paper, contracts and checks. Now all is digital. Of course, no one wants to go back now that things are a lot easier. A big step up to get them to happen, but once you do it, it really works. And the other thing that I just wanted to share with related to COVID is that, as you mentioned, Franklin, too, I see COVID and the racial issues being addressed as incredibly intertwined and intricately based on each other. And one of the things that I share with people, and that I kind of I think about a lot, and I'm not sure necessarily what to do about it, other than that it helps me focus on issues, which is that we've been able to have these huge protests, which has drawn a lot of issue. And I'm very optimistic because, unlike usual just commentary, actual change is happening. Police departments are changing policies. Foundations are changing the amounts of money they grant. A lot of things are actually changing, which is substantive and good. But the racial implications of COVID seem to be lost or secondary to that. And one of the key statistics, is that on average, unfortunately, every year about 500 Black people are killed by the police. In the past 2 months, basically, because the deaths really only started for the past 2 months, Black people have died at a rate 2.4 times the rate of white people dying from COVID. What that means is that if Black people died at the same rate as white people over the past 2 months, 13,000 Black people would be alive today who are now deceased. 13,000 in 2 months. So in other words, the loss that the Black community that we are experiencing related to COVID and racial inequity is exponentially greater than police brutality. And I would like the focus to be on all of them. But if we can harness the visceral nature of the police brutality, because we capture that on camera, and we can't capture the 13,000 lost in, you know, their rooms alone without even their family there. If that was caught on camera, I think our protests might even be 10 times as much. So, but if the protest can not only address the police brutality and inequality, but also healthcare and so many other issues of inequality that actually impact our community even more.
Yeah, it's sobering. So I want to dig a little deeper there, and I'll come to you, Franklin. COVID, you know, is impacting all of us, but COVID will come and go. But like most crises, it accelerates and exposes underlying trends. Like you just said, Aaron, suddenly we were always going to do more online things, but suddenly it's overnight. That was always going to be a trend, but it's accelerated. And as crises, typically over centuries and over history, as crises have accelerated and pointed out the good things of the human species, it also unfortunately brings out the other side of our nature. And so here we are, we're still struggling with social injustice and racism, and it's impacting all of us, and definitely and clearly disproportionately African American communities. And here we are in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. Franklin, as an arts leader, what are you thinking about? You're muted.
Sorry about that. I think on a very basic primary level, there is a desire on our part as a cultural institution where our mission is about presenting international modern and contemporary art, but through a lens that highlights the work of Latin America and the Caribbean while looking toward the African diaspora. So we already feel, you know, the opportunity that this presents to shine more of a light on the work that we are already doing. I think that as a field, this is the opportunity to question the ways in which we actually go about being a museum, the ways in which we go about being a business. You know, the whole concept of having a board of trustees, and how does that fit into the ability for true participation, true community participation in the work of our museum specifically. So I think there are a lot of things that are going to come out of this moment that we're all grappling with as a field. DEAI, diversity, equity, accessibility, inclusivity. We are all talking about that already. Now, same way that the digital is accelerated, those conversations are accelerating right now. And I think that we have to take advantage of that opportunity. And it happens on not only a staff side, but on a board side. Who are we? Who are we here for? I think those are the kind of questions that I'm most interested in answering now. But also, you know, as far as visual art museums in particular, over the last 5-6 years, we have made the case for being community-centered. We've made the case for wanting to be partners in a civic conversation that has meaningful impact on people's lives. And this is that opportunity. We've got to take advantage of that, and now we cannot shrink away from it. It's not enough to say that we're here solely for the conversation. How are we going to have an impact on people's lives? And I'm excited about that part of the conversation. So those are some of the things that we're, you know, I think this opens us up for. Just the moment and the challenge of the moment goes back to what are cultural organizations for? And if we aren't for making these kind of changes right now, then I think some of us are going to fall by the wayside.
I want to ask you a question, Aaron, in addition to just asking your thoughts on what are you thinking in this moment in time as a leader about COVID, but racism and injustice and and all that. You did make a few points, but I want to ask you about that. Do you think this time is different?
It's a great question, and I with caution say yes. I can say absolutely that it feels different. I feel different, and the things people are saying and that they're doing so far appears to be different. I think we aren't far enough along yet to be able to have a determinative answer on that, because unfortunately, just as a society, we tend to be rather fickle. And just like our technology has had us go from, maybe 3-hour movies to 2.5-hour movies to little TikTok videos, that we have just consistently shrunk our attention span to an ever lessening amount of time, and so I worry that in a couple months, when whatever else will have come into the national consciousness, will there be resiliency to this change of trajectory in the issue, especially relating to racial equity? And so what I think is, and what I'm trying to do with any conversation I have, is to emphasize not just talking about it and issuing statements and doing all of that, but what functionally are you doing in terms of policy change now? Because then it's much, much harder to pull back on a policy or change it. But it's much easier to say, let's talk about this, let's put together a working group, and in 6 months, we'll come back and figure out what to do. In 6 months, the national consciousness, the visceral nature of watching a human being's life snuffed out in the middle of a street will have faded, unfortunately. You would hope that would stay with us, but it will fade in terms of the national consciousness. So I think that there is a window of opportunity in which to put into place the functional things that will bring about the systemic change, because systemic change isn't going to happen like that. So that's why I think the policies, the initiatives, the commitments that are made now that are much harder to draw back on, that's really important. And I'm looking to see which organizations are taking those type of steps beyond just, because I do think it's important to say, that we are, in partnership, that these issues are important to us. But it's whether an organization is going beyond that to say, here functionally is what we're doing. And I give one just example in terms of American orchestras, and I'm sure that it's probably very similar for visual art and of course across all the performing arts, but less than 1% of all of the works performed by all American orchestras are by any composer of color. So if the field as in its entirety said, that is not a best practice, we are now shifting and we are saying, let's not even say 10%, let's say 5%. That we think if 5% of the works you are performing by an orchestra are not by a Black composer, you are not considered to be doing best practice as it relates to repertoire. Because our mission is not to perform the best works of a small slice of composers from a small slice of history, from a small geography in Northern Europe. Or in Europe, it is to perform the best works that exist in the genres that we want to perform. And we are not doing that. And so those orchestras who make that type of commitment, which then 6 months from now will be very hard to pull back on, that's the systemic change, as opposed to those who, say, we feel this issue, we believe in it, we are going to come together and do meaningful things that will show that we demonstrate that we care. Those types of things are nice, but don't give me confidence that things will actually change in 10 years.
You know, Aaron, I can't help thinking back on a very, very graphic example of your very well articulated point that early functional commitments bring the change later on. Many years ago, I was recruited to come and convert an all-white performing arts organization in South Africa to multicultural. This is before apartheid was abolished, but and Mandela was still in prison. But the board had the vision that this place in Durban needed to transform. And they asked me what would I do, and so I said, well, firstly, this all-white board has to become majority Black, and the all-white senior management has to become majority Black. In South Africa, it was simple; it was Black or white. And then managerially, and this is the point I want to make, functionally, I appointed a Black director, a VP, I guess you would call him here. And his job was to make sure this implementation occurs according to certain standards that we were going to set. And every department, the orchestra, the ballet, the opera, the dance company, the chorus, we had in-house full-time, all of that in this company. I directed that a third of each of their budgets had to go through this person. So a third of the orchestra's budget had to be rubber stamped by this guy as being supportive of our new vision, which was to reach audiences we've never reached before, to make it easy, to make it accessible, to feature them, to develop them, to expose them on our stages, et cetera, et cetera. And that one action, forcing a third of everybody's budget through a funnel of legitimacy, if you will, to show the intent, changed the organization more than anything else. Because I know how we all are. If we don't have to do this, we won't do this, whatever it is.
Totally. I have such fond memories the first time I heard some of the extraordinary stories you shared of your work there, which is unbelievable and amazing. And I just wanted to reinforce what you're saying, especially for any arts administrators or those who are on boards, et cetera, who are watching this, that functionality is so critically important. And anytime I'm having a conversation, orchestras or others, and I'm talking and they're like, oh, well, we're trying to do this or so on and so forth, this isn't working. I say, what percentage of your budget is committed to this? And of course, usually, well, I don't really know, or, so I'm like, so, actual change takes resources, it takes money. Yeah. And also, I always use this example too. I said, if there's a corporation and they have some particular goal, they are like, we need, Coca-Cola's like, no Black people are drinking Coca-Cola. We need 30% of the Black people to be drinking Coca-Cola by 8 months from now, and they take someone and they put them in charge of it and they give them some incentives and they say, if you hit these benchmarks that may relate to market, race, whatever it might be, consumption, et cetera, then you will also get these bonuses, these incentives. And somehow in the arts, we're so resistant to calling to task, to saying this percentage of a budget, this actual percentage of our audience, we want to stray away from that. And I do believe that one of the big reasons why is because it's not easy work. And people don't want to have to be held to account. Yeah. So I just couldn't agree with you more. Those kinds of examples are what bring about real change.
Franklin, I want to come back to the question I asked Aaron, but also for you to riff on what we've just talked about. So feel free. I mean, you mentioned earlier that you're wondering about structure, the board of directors. Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. But the question I asked him first was, do you think this time is different?
It's hard for me to say. Coming into this field in the early 90s, thinking about all of the conversations around multiculturalism, around globalism, and this extreme embrace, I think, at least as far as a conversation goes in terms of contemporary art. And we recognize that for the most part, those were conversations. There was not necessarily systemic change that accompanied that conversation. I believe that this time has the potential to be different. I believe that we have engaged, as we talked about initially, in some of the promise of the internet in that moment as a tool of collective community and strengthening ties between people. I believe that has perhaps put us in a position where this time can be different. As far as it goes specifically to visual arts in particular, we have engaged in studies in the past that, tell you the obvious, right? You don't have any people of color in senior positions. You don't have any curators who are Black. So all of this is we felt it, we knew it, and have known it for some time. But then we made it a research project, and as evidence of real systemic change. And then you have foundations that say, okay, this is something we can actually change. We've had a influx of fellowship programs recently, right? And I think that there is something to question in that. Do these fellowships then lead to real systemic change? And I would say that yes, we have the opportunity and potential for real change. There is a group of people who want my job now, who also look like me. And I know that was not the case 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. So there is a pool that is here and ready. So while all of these boards and all of these museums say we're ready for real systemic change, it has to happen at this point in time, at least to some degree. So I'm incredibly optimistic for that. So yes, I believe that we have the chance for this to be different.
But Franklin, I'm not in your world. I mean, my wife is a visual artist, as you can see behind me, but it's not my world day to day. But my perception of the work that you're doing at the Pérez is that you are putting this lens of social justice on all the work that you do, and your curation and your exhibits are clearly focused on this. So are you seeing that has an impact? Does it feel different? Have you heard people say, my goodness, this is the place where you see that side of the world?
Yes, absolutely. And it's one thing, I think, to speak about us specifically and then to think about the field as a whole. I feel very much empowered by the work that we have done in the past that has put a lens on many of these issues. And I feel like we're in a very good position to be a part of positive conversations that lead to actual change in the near future. Absolutely, 100%. And part of that is about being here. I mean, I love LACMA. When I was at Los Angeles County Museum of Art, we had a board of probably 60 something people. I don't think when I was there was one Black person. When I came to Miami, I knew that the situation was different, right? We talk about being founded in 1984. We were founded in the realm of deep societal change and a sense of not one of trust in a moment that is post Mariel, in a moment that you have many Black people, particularly here in Miami, who could not believe that how do we not rise up at the same time? That part of the conversation is something that we totally sit upon here. And then we think about aspects of immigration on top of the racism. And of course, we even had, this brings us back to, and Aaron mentioned, the visceral aspects of the image of somebody in a video with their knee on somebody's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Unbelievable, right? But we had that. Arthur McDuffie, murdered in 1979. At least 18 people were killed in the ensuing protests, as the officers were, of course, acquitted the following year. And that kind of is the background upon which we were founded. So not only did we begin in that point in time, 10 years later, when we decided to grow up a little bit, we called ourselves Miami Art Museum. We decided we were going to start collecting, and we started collecting in that moment that I referred to earlier, one filled with at least a conversation around multiculturalism, around globalism, around at least representation. And so our collection also pivots from that point in time. So we are in a different position here to some degree, where we should be the leaders in this conversation. We are one of those places where people speak people speak Spanish to a much greater degree at home than they do English. We are a city and county council that runs with 3 languages, including Creole, with the Spanish and English. So we do have this distinct position, and it's hard to say it with praise, because we all know that this is a challenging environment for all of these things. But we have a distinct position that puts us in a place where we should be able to lead these conversations to some degree to create a better world.
Aaron, let me ask you a similar question. I know you mentioned earlier some statistics about orchestra demographics. Your Sphinx program, when it started and still now, focuses entirely on preparing classical musicians of color for a future in this country and for a future in the profession, and changing the shape of the profession. Has it happened?
I would say that Sphinx has been able to move the needle more than it had been moved in history prior to that. Are things where they need to be? Of course not. And, to give you an example, when I founded Sphinx, Blacks in orchestras were around 1%. So Sphinx was able to more than double that, and also for those who are Latinx as well. And Sphinx is not, remotely solely responsible for that, but was able to play a role, and especially a catalytic role. So in this past 20 years, we've been able to more than double that representation of those who are Black or Latinx in orchestras. So absolutely, there has been movement on the needle, but is it where we need to be? Of course not. And that's also why, because no single organization can really bring about that level of change. It can often be a catalyst. So one of the most important things that Sphinx has done in recent years is Sphinx Connect. Which is a gathering now of almost 1,000 people from all over the globe who are all interested in these issues surrounding diversity in the arts, and who gather in Detroit and think about these issues, talk about them, present on different things that people are doing in various communities. And of course, there is a very large representation of practitioners of color who are engaged in all of this work, in addition to all of the top administrators of color or not of color who are interested in this work. And so that type of convening and place to generate ideas, enable people to build partnerships and collaborations, I think is really important. So yes, move the needle, but definitely not where we need to be.
Franklin, maybe the last question, unless you want to talk about something else. What is our role as arts leaders in this moment? How do we play a role to move this social justice thing to a place where it's finally isn't just a hashtag, is finally a systemic moment? What's our role as arts leaders?
I think we have to use the power that we do have in terms of what our staffs look like, what our boards look like. Just off of that wonderful example that you talked about in Durban, knowing clearly that if we look like the change we envision, then that change will certainly follow. And I think we have the ability to at least have a hand in that. And then I'm reminded now of one thing that is less about our hand, but at a certain point, how to get out of the way. If I look at many of the protests here, and I know my staff members who have taken part, you know, I'm 25 years older than them, and their relationship to a lot of the issues is going to be a little bit more keyed in sometimes, and a little bit more progressive even sometimes. And I got to just be able to get out of the way and listen to them and really let them lead. Those are two different ways I think we go about it.
No, that's profound, and it's very challenging. I was hoping nobody would bring up age, but you did. So thank you, Franklin, for sharing. That's a sobering perspective. Aaron, what's our role? What's our role as arts leaders?
I think I will, of course, completely agree with everything that Franklin shared. And also, I would say that there is this sense of action that I do believe that there are times as leaders, we bear the ultimate responsibility of our organizations. And, you know, we know the impact of our decisions could mean, you know, jobs lost or lives affected, constituents not reached. And so we shouldn't be cavalier in decision making. However, I do believe that there are times when we don't have the luxury of extended periods of consideration to make certain decisions or take actions. For example, when COVID struck, you know, the University of Michigan did not have 6 months to consider how to go remote and how to deploy remote teaching and how to engage faculty and students around that and so on and so forth. We just had to do it. And I believe that in the same way that there is a pandemic related to COVID, there is certainly an epidemic of racism, and that the 6-month, 9-month window to take actions related to these things is too long, and too many people and too many institutions will suffer detrimental effects by continuing to take those types of approaches. And so I think that now is the time for still thoughtful, absolutely still incorporating risk assessment, but to have a sense of urgency and impact relating to decision making, I think is a key thing that is in many ways lies solely with our institution's leadership.
It's a big responsibility, and yes, racism is a far more deadly virus,
for which unfortunately there will be no vaccine.
Yeah.
Well said.
Is there anything else that any of you want to add that you felt moved in this discussion to add? I've been very inspired to listen to you both. Enjoy your colleague relationship we have, and our friendships as well. Aaron, anything you want to add? Franklin?
I'm just glad that you invited me to be part of this conversation, and you've really been an inspiration to me. Your leadership and the things and impact that you've done in your prior positions and currently in Miami really is extraordinary and stands out in the field. So I really just am honored to be invited by you and to be able to join with you, Franklin. It's just, it really is an honor.
No, absolutely. It's great speaking with you both. And what a pleasure to meet, Aaron.
Yeah, big time.
Thank you for putting us together.
We're going to be in touch a lot after this.
Yeah, I need you to send me that book. I'm going to send you something, and we have each other's emails. So
awesome. Sounds great.
Oh, you have to read both. You have to read both Aaron's books, not just behind him.
Okay.
The Uncommon Rhythm, I think, is what it's called. Is a lovely story as well of Aaron's.
a Black, white, Jewish, Jehovah's Witness, Irish Catholic
Right.
adoptee's journey to leadership. So.
Well, Aaron, I know Franklin would join me if you're the next time you're in Miami, we're going to have a meal together and raise a glass and just Franklin, do you agree? That would be lovely to have
Absolutely.
a moment of just
I would love that, and hopefully we will be at a point where we won't have to socially distance.
Yes.
So a couple of days ago, as you know, the idea was to give you an opportunity to join a larger group. And so because of our scheduling, it couldn't happen. So I had a really stimulating discussion with Colleen Jennings-Roggensack and Robert Battle a couple of days ago. And so we'll put these all together and look forward to post it on Arsht at Home. So thank you both. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Franklin. I deeply
Thank you, Johann.
your time and your sharing so openly and so wisely. Thank you very much and have a great time.
Thank
you so
you.
much, Johann. Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Yes.
You too, guys. Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.